Hello everyone, my name is AJ, and I don't have a good intro yet. Today I'm going to be redesigning two characters for my Undertale AU, Otherverse. Starting with our current creativity outcode, which is basically the god of creation, Blick. They're a version of Ink, who was originally created by Kamyet, sort of in a way. They're more like a descendant, but it's a little confusing. You're gonna want to watch my previous videos on this, otherwise you might be a little bit lost, and even still you might still be lost. I'd appreciate the views though. Blick has gone through several designs throughout the years, some better, some worse. This was their first design ever. Since they were based off of ink sands, I did make them a skeleton, but I also wanted a little variety in the cast, so their face shape is more like a gaster than a sans. They originally had a gray coat, a big scarf, and these little frilly, spiky things around their wrists and ankles to hint towards them being a jester type character. Their second design was honestly worse. I changed the coat out for a dress and took off a bunch of the spiky details, and toned down the amount of tattoos I originally gave them. I don't like this one, but it was their design for a very long time. This was actually the design I ended up going with for the pilot comic. Their most recent design was definitely my favorite, even if it is really complex. Since they're a creation outcode, I wanted them to look a little bit more unnecessarily complex because it's a part of their character. I took away their shirt, made the scarf bigger, and gave it some fur, and I gave them some puffy pants. I also added a lot of metal cuffs and whatnot to give them more visual ties to Dream. There was also this experimental design that I never liked even when I drew it, so I like to pretend it doesn't exist. Now that it's been a few years, I've come to a realization that there have been so many good Undertale characters that I have been completely ignoring, and frankly, so is most of the fandom. Because Undertale is a game and not a show, there's a lot of really important characters that just don't get a lot of screen time because you're by yourself for most of the gameplay. People tend to get most attached to characters that 1. Have a lot of screen time, 2. Have a lot of lines, 3. Have a large effect on the story, and 4. Subvert expectations. The character that fits all of those characteristics best is Sans, which is why he is largely the audience favorite, and why most AUs are so heavily focused around him. I don't really want to keep contributing to the Sans verse because as much as I love it, and I will always have a special place for it in my heart, I want this to feel more like a real, full-fledged alternate multiverse, and not just an alternate character. So I've decided to switch out my go-to tall Sans base for a Metaton instead. Blick was originally conceived of as being a secondary ruler for the Kingdom of Day combined with small elements of jesters, but I've decided to change that to Blick being a full-on court jester who also functions as an advisor for the king. They don't have any official power. For their new design, I copied the most recent one's outfit near exactly and only changed the body underneath. I did also change the colors though. I brought back apathy as the main color for their outfit. The original Ink didn't have any real emotions, so since they're inspired by that character, I decided on something similar. They can still feel emotions on their own, they just don't care about anyone other than themselves because of stuff that's happened to them in their childhood. They can still feel emotions on their own, they just don't care about anyone other than themselves because of the way that they were raised. Everything they do is self-serving and for their own entertainment. Since they're a robot, so long as they keep up on general maintenance, they can theoretically live forever, so I decided to make their metal skin more steampunk inspired, just in terms of the metal being brown, because they are so old. I brought back the striped tail segments because I like it. For their twin scarves, I changed it from rainbow segments to just pink, yellow, and green, almost like a mango. I repeated that pattern of colors in other places too, like in the gradient on their hair and tail. I kept Metaton's usual hair but made it nice and fluffy, and put a ponytail on the back. I kind of didn't really want to keep the floating horns because it adds a lot of extra detail, but they've been such an important part of their character design ever since the very beginning that I couldn't get rid of them. I did change the pattern on them a little bit more to match their facial markings that indicate that her lower jaw is a separate piece than the rest of her face. For her eyelid, I put segments on there so you can kind of get an idea of how it closes. I had this idea that her eye closes like the shutter on a camera. That kind of doesn't make sense with how I've half-lidded her eye in this particular expression, but let it be known that is how it moves. I wanted to emphasize as much robotic stuff about her as I could, otherwise she just looks like a person with some weird makeup. I really love how she turned out, and I can't wait to put her in action. Next up is Air. Air has gone through several tweaking periods, but only one real redesign. This was the first drawing of him ever. He is our current destruction outcode based off of Error by Lover of Piggies. His job is to break down AUs into individual strings of code that can be recycled to create new and better AUs. Though his job does require him to end life on a mass scale, he is a sweetheart who's scared of his own shadow. His first design was a simple dark gray robe that went to his knees. He also had a tail and some floating horns to give him some ties to Blick. Or, well, it was actually the other way around, but whatever. Stripes on his face and a pair of actual eyes and not just the usual sockets. In his second design, I made his cloak longer and changed it to black instead of gray to contrast with his face better. On my experimental page, I changed him to this, which eventually became this. I gave him satyr legs, for lack of a better term. I made his tail thicker, and I completely changed his cloak. It's now much shorter and much more flared out, which gives it more ties to the very first destruction outcode who ever lived in my particular AU. I also gave him a scarf around the neck. I kept it brown with 2 bits in the back being purple to match the colorful part of his cloak. Now for the changes I made in the redesign of this video. I decided to take the satyr legs off. As much as I love them, they don't lend themselves very well to this particular outfit. They just look weird. I did try really hard to make them work, but they didn't. After I gave him regular legs, a lot of other things fell into place. I made his cloak really big and puffy and thick on him. I decided to add some snow boots to his outfit since the place that he's going to be living is a fairly cold environment. There was something about the face that was wigging me out, so I did eventually redo it. I gave him some rounded cheeks, and that pretty much fixed it. I did also make the eyebrows a little thinner, but still wanted them to have some thickness to them. I also modified his proportions to make him a little bit shorter. I have this problem where I tend to make characters too long when I draw them all by themselves. I'm better at getting heights correctly when I'm drawing 2 characters on the same page. Since figuring that out, I've been paying more attention to when I do it so that I can correct myself. For colors, I chose Curiosity, which is also his soul trait, as well as Dedication and Neutrality, with Hatred as his neutral color. I think he turned out super cute. The way that negativity and destruction outcodes come to be has a serious effect on the way that they will be raised and treated when they're older. The 2 outcodes before Mary and Air had escaped and were living as fugitives. The Kingdom of Day managed to recapture Mary's parent, but the destruction outcode was killed. When an outcode dies without an heir, they respawn somewhere completely random as an infant. So while Mary was born at the castle and thus allowed some small freedoms, Air was brought in by his parents when he was old enough to be separated from his mother, and thus not allowed that same freedom. Since he had already tasted freedom, there was this concern that he would try to escape, so he was put in a high security prison. Destruction outcodes are already treated differently than negativity outcodes because destroying things is something they can't help but do. It's ingrained in their code. On the other hand, negativity outcodes are believed to be it is believed that it is possible to train negativity outcodes out of their base behaviors. Destruction outcodes are considered more like animals or forces of nature than they are people. Once Air was found, rather than being raised by Blick like he was supposed to be, he was checked into a prison and left to rot. So he's got 0 social skills. Honestly, this might have been for the best, because if Blick had decided to keep the baby she'd been handed, she might have accidentally put him in the oven and put the pizza in the crib. So he survived, but his social skills? Nil. Anxiety issues? Oh, we've got them. Depression? Don't get me started. For Blick's backstory, we have ourselves a child star that fell off, went insane, and is somehow more normal now, but despite their behavior still being eternally self-serving and self-sabotaging at the same time. Being an outcode is always going to bring with it a certain level of fame, but usually you would try and keep your famous baby as private as possible. That didn't happen with Blick. The very first creation outcode, Ink, was asexual and never had any children, so when he died, his spirit respawned in the body of a brand new Metaton that had been created but not yet filled with the usual ghost spirit that goes in it. Their mother, a version of Alphys, immediately went about making them famous, thinking that she had created a soul, and then later, when they were old enough to speak and think for themselves, into a dancer and singer. There was a pretty frequent problem in Blick's childhood of people treating them like an adult because that's what they looked like, even though they were just a kid and they weren't ready for that level of fame, admiration, or responsibility. Trauma all around. Fan art! I stream on Twitch, come follow me. I take commissions, and I have huge discounts on my Patreon. Speaking of which, a huge thank you goes out to my financial supporters, JRDS, Immortal Jesse, Anna J, Blodryu Malware, Mercer Scott Holt, J Draws, and Silent Savvy. You are all the greatest. Join me again next time for something very cool for Valentine's Day. Bye-bye!